everyone. Welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you once again at B2B World. At the debate today, we have a very important show. Today, we're going to be talking about the 1971 war. We're going to look at it more closely. Of course, there are many versions that exist, and there are many different ways that people remember the 1971 war. But we are here today to make sure that we give the real perspective and try and take a look at all the different angles that exist and try and understand what really happened and what sort of factors really contributed to what became the outcome of the 1971 war. There are so many things that are still left undiscussed, and there's so many things that we can still learn from. A lot happened back in 1971, even before the war, which also was a contributing factor. So we're going to try and explore the political scenario, the historical context as well, the war itself, the aftermath of the war, and the involvement of other political and, of course, foreign interests in the war as well. All of this is going to be discussed in today's show with, of course, our two very special analysts who are always in the studios with us, Mr. Farrukh Batafi and Mr. Raja Faisal. We'll also be joined by experts from the military in the studio online. They will also be shedding light on what went on in the 1971 war and what sort of lessons still exist for us today. Before we talk about this in more detail, I would like to start off with a brief analysis of what really was the situation back in Pakistan before this war actually took place. Farrukh, I would like you to give an overview for our audience as to what sort of a political scenario we were experiencing then.
Right, Sana, I was hoping that you are going to start with Faisal.
But as you were warned, Farrukh, this is how it went.
Yeah, you did warn me. So I'm going to actually come clean and I'm going to talk about this, right?
Please.
There a very important thing at this moment. The question right now is, why are we even debating this now, right? There have been many traumas in every country's history. So this might be the biggest one, but it seems that there are two constant reminders. One, Bangladesh itself that broke away from Pakistan. And the other one is the bully next door, that is India. I mean, remarkable government they have got right now. I haven't seen such stupidity. At this time when they are already being accused of extremism, they are actually celebrating the 50 years of a time when they were actually exporting terrorism into Pakistan's territories, right? And yet they don't see how it is going to backfire. The CDS that actually died recently was going to an event and they were actually forcing the army to celebrate all that as well. So what does it tell you about India today? But regarding what was happening in 1971, there are four important angles to see. One, when the push came to shove, how did our soldiers actually fought on the ground? So that is the ground level analysis. The second one is historical perspective. Third one that you have actually pointed out and asked about is the political angle and political aspect, or so to say, who done it, right? And the fourth one, and that is very important to remember, is the structural one. So let me first of all mention that at the when the fight went on, and I'm sure that we have, many of our viewers have seen the videos and testimonials from the Indian side, how bravely our soldiers fought at that time. But it was a hopeless situation because India had maneuvered situation in such a way, and of course Pakistan had systemic problems internally because of the political scenario that was totally exploited, right? The second aspect that I was talking about is structural one. And while we talk about 1971, nobody actually realizes what happened in 1947, how the two sides actually came into being, and why is it that the two countries, the two parts of a country actually existed on opposite sides of the worst belligerent state towards both of them, right? So you can talk about Radcliffe Award, you can talk about other 1911 reforms that actually created West Bangladesh, Bengal and East Bengal, separated them. But I think that it was a geographical impossibility to keep both sides together, right? And the fact that we continued for 25 years, it actually tells you that still both sides kept on trying to survive this and work together. Now the political situation also is interesting because Pakistan had struggled to get its constitution. When you look at the sizes of both sides, the West Pakistan was larger in the size, but in population it had lesser number compared to Bengal or Bangladesh or East Pakistan. And at that time, there was this thing called parity, that they equated West Pakistan with East Pakistan. So that created a lot of problems. India kept on playing, with fire as well. And finally, historically, we had one aspect, this is very important to remember, that the actual problem started in 1948 when they had this problem of identity, right? So when you look at all these issues, so what I can tell you is this was going to happen.
Right.
Perhaps we would have moved on because Bangladesh is doing well as well, but it is because of the bully next door that we keep on revisiting it.
Right, and the issue of identity, of course, is an important one, Farokh, which I want to touch upon in detail later as well. We have been joined by one of our guests, Major General Retired Simre Salik, who's joined us on Skype. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I do hear you, Sana.
Welcome to the debate, sir. Thank you for joining us. Of course, we're trying to remember the 1971 war and to also understand what exactly went wrong, who really is to blame, and what sort of lessons can we learn from it. Earlier in the discussion with Farokh, he mentioned that the issue also stems back to the partition and the fact that this may have been a geographical impossibility. Do you agree with that, sir? Do you think that, of course, there is so much that was internally going on within Pakistan as well, but had that not happened, even then, this is something which was inevitable?
Thank you very much, Sana, for getting me on this show. My point of view is that the way two wings of Pakistan were created, that is Eastern Wing and Western Wing, with an arch rival and a large country in between, in the middle. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
With that kind of geography, in my view, it was not sustainable. And taking a cue from Robert D. Kaplan, who has written a book on revenge of geography, I think the happening of or the dismemberment of Pakistan was something to do with the revenge of geography. Pakistan, once it was created, it was given a stepmotherly treatment by the British as well as by the Indians. Now, in that kind of state, once we lost our founding father in the first year of coming to creation of Pakistan, and then after that fighting a war in 1948, the first year, in 18th year fighting another war, 1965, and in 24th year of our life fighting yet another war, which culminated in dismemberment of the country. So it was a peculiar state of that geography, and besides that, machinations and intrigues by Indians, which led to unfortunate and very sad dismemberment of Pakistan.
Right. How do you see the Indian involvement? Of course, when we talk about India today, there is so much that Pakistan keeps on pointing out to the international community on what India does in terms of sponsoring terrorism in other parts of the world, particularly in Pakistan as well. And this is, of course, something very obvious that happened back in 1971 as well. Yet, despite that, we see that the Indian side seemed to be celebrating victory in terms of what happened in the 1971 war. How do you think the world really sees it?
Now, Pakistan was created on the basis of two-nation theory, and India being a larger country, and Pakistan was carved out of India, they were not happy, and they were all bent upon to undo the two-nation theory. And once they succeeded in dismemberment of the country, dismemberment of Pakistan, Indira Gandhi, then Prime Minister of India, had boasted that she has thrown two-nation theory into the Bay of Bengal. I would say that 50 years later, we should be thankful to Prime Minister Modi for giving a due life to the two-nation theory.
Yes,
sir, I wanted to ask you a question. If we read The Dead Reckoning by Shamila Bose, she clearly mentions in this book, and she says that the exaggerated numbers of people, they were shown that, atrocities, they were exaggerated, because whoever was asked, obviously from the people, the reporters were entirely relying on the ground. Whoever was out there, they were asking them, and majority of the people, of course, they were reporting oddly and exaggerated figures. So could we not say that in them days even media played a key role, and while they were playing all of these reportings from Dhaka, from Bengal, they actually went into favors of India, of Mukti Bahini, and against Pakistan at that time. Do we not see it today as well, that we are misrepresentative?
What did you say then? We
are being misrepresented, sir.
Okay, fine. Now, as far as the myths about 1971 war are concerned, there I see them in two. I categorize them into two different categories. One is which is to do with the numbers. That is how many military captives were there, how many casualties were there, how many people were killed by Pakistan Army. And second part is that of ideational propaganda, that if Pakistan Army did not fight very bravely, there was sort of genocide by the Pakistan Army, and war crimes. Now, I say that as far as the figures, those which are related to the figures are concerned, those have been refuted by Sharmila Bose, as well as Afra Siab Mehdi Saab, as well as Dr. Junaid in their respective books, whereby it has been proven that the total number of army personnel in eastern wing of Pakistan at that time was not more than, in any case, 34,000. Exactly. And if we add second line forces as well as police, then it is not more than total 45,000. So there is no question of having 93,000 captives as well as military personnel are concerned. As regards the casualties were concerned, the figure has come up repeatedly of 3 million, which is absolutely false and exaggerated. It has been also proven by the research of Dr. Junaid, that the figure varies from 26,000, as less as 26,000 to as high as 300,000. So 3 million is out of question. However, the figures of Mukti Bahini acting, impersonating as Pakistan Army personnel and killing something like 150,000 people, I think those are all exaggerated figures which have been quoted.
Right. We also welcome AVM retired Mr. Ijaz Malik in this show. He has joined us on telephone line. Thank you very much, Mr. Ijaz, for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right. So we were earlier, of course, talking about the kind of documentation and the kind of perspectives, of course, that are put forward from the 1971 war. We know that India, of course, is celebrating victory, has always talked about how they have been able to defeat Pakistan, when in reality, of course, there was a lot going on in them actually sponsoring terrorism and, of course, creating this divide which resulted in whatever happened in the 1971 war. A major factor, of course, was also the issue of ethno-linguistic factors that were a major role in terms of the Indian factors also playing a role in this regard. Of course, when there are internal issues, this is when somebody else can prey upon them. How much of this do you think that the people of Pakistan and the people of Bangladesh understand?
Actually, the term fifth generation warfare, which is now widely talked about and generally understood very candidly nowadays, if we see the build up to the 1970 election and then the 1971 March military operation and ultimately the debacle of East Pakistan, we will see Indian footprint all over these events. India has been trying for years, and India was not alone in that. India was being supported by Russians. The Mukti Bahini was being trained by Indians, and they were infiltrated into then East Pakistan. And it was a classic guerrilla warfare where the terrain was hostile, where the indigenous population was hostile because of Indian propaganda, and our armed forces, which we were just hearing, one of our participants was saying, it was around 34,000 regular troops only, and who fought very well. Even Field Marshal Manik Shah, in his post-war appraisal, he commended Pakistani soldiers and officers who fought very well in various battles in East Pakistan. Just imagine a force totally outnumbered against about 500,000 plus regular Indian troops, and indigenous population against them, who have been, fighting them over rivers, in streets, in forests. So I think we have been too apologetic. We haven't done, true justice to the soldiers who embraced Shahadat and who fought against Mukti Bani on one side and Indians on the other.
For sure, absolutely. And we mentioned this earlier on as well. Farokh talked about how on the ground level, of course, there was a lot of heroic actions that have been taken place by the troops, and we definitely commend that. I would also like to talk about something with regards to what sort of factors come into play, or which level of engagement are we looking at. Farokh, whenever we talk about different political issues that are going on in the world, we also talk about national interest and the decisions made by different states and the institutions. But when in retrospective, we also mention particular individuals when we're talking about historical context. How much of a role do you think that has to play? Does the individual factors, people who were politically involved back in 1971, whether in Pakistan, Bangladesh or India, really had their own individual contributions to whatever took place, or can we just talk about this at a national level?
Right. I think individuals matter. Yesterday, actually, I saw a preview of a brilliant documentary by Javed Jabbar Saab, who's a media veteran and institution in himself, and he is also focusing on this matter, right? So while it was going on, I was thinking that we Pakistanis have the habit of actually, being selective when it comes to apportioning blame within the country, right? There's always tribalism. There is one side that calls itself the democratic side or Bhutto side. So they don't see any flaw with Bhutto or other political agents. And then there is, of course, the military side that doesn't see that there was a dictatorship at that time or martial law at that time. But there is something that both sides have not seen. Today we could criticize Modi, but Modi is not just Modi in India. Modi is a political variant, second political variant of a previous character, that is Indira Gandhi. Whatever Modi does today is actually Indira Gandhi 2.0. She actually imposed emergency. She was the one who started experimenting with the soft Hindutva, this two nation, one nation and all that kind of stories. And she actually damaged the country, their own country, so much that in the end their toxicity actually ended up hampering or affecting Pakistan as well. When you talk about individuality, her individuality actually, because she was not at league with her own father, who was a stalwart after all, but that is one aspect which is very important. Now, when you talk about Pakistan's domestic reports and all that, we keep on talking about Hammoud-ur-Rahman Commission report, but hardly anyone actually mentions that Justice Hammoud-ur-Rahman, when he was made the Chief Justice by Bhutto Saab at that time, because Constitution was also being written, the interesting thing was that first you had to appoint a CJ and then you had to actually confirm him. And Bhutto Saab actually never confirmed him till the time that report was out. So there was a tacit, built-in concession to Bhutto Saab's own legacy or responsibility. Then of course the military and political side, there are many people who played their negative role. That's why I keep on saying that if you want to really learn from history, open your mind and read every kind of book, from the harshest critique to the most serious apology. For example, I talked about General Niazi. He is actually thought to be the worst, he's framed as the worst person. But have you read his book, Betrayal of East Pakistan? He gives you the topography and how India was infiltrating and what kind of strategy they wanted to go for to cull it, and yet he was not permitted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Sana, I just wanted to add something. I think when we look at the two wars, one 1965 and the other one 1971, on the both of the theaters, there is one thing which is missing in 1971. That was unity. In 1965 war, we had the unity, the right unity, and the whole nation was fighting. But when it comes to 1971 war in East Pakistan, nation wasn't fighting. Obviously, population over there, by the looks of it, as we know now that Modi, he claimed it as well. Plus, if we look at the statements of Ajit Doval, the one he gave a lecture in Shastra University, and he himself claimed it, that they were behind all the fuss of Mukti Bahini. So Mukti Bahini and everything which was being run in 1971, they created divides over there. They created divides, and then to hamper it up, they had a propaganda machine which constantly showed the odd figures of whatever was going on inside, things which were, they did not exist, but they were claiming that this is what the genocide is being committed, whereas it was simply a tiny civil war which was being exaggerated on the media as well. Propaganda was created, and that's how the unity was disturbed in East Pakistan in 1971 war, and that's how
right. And Faisal, a very important factor that we discuss in today's politics in Pakistan is also with regards to the civil and military leadership being on the same page, and this is what we've been talking about a lot, and how necessary it is for national progress as well. And this is something which has been a sour topic in Pakistani politics. When we look at the situation back in 1971, Mr. Samrez, my question to you would be, we see that perhaps this sort of alliance did not exist in the past, and not even then. Do you think that the importance of the civil and military leaders being on the same page is reflective of peace and prosperity in the country, and when that does not exist, this is why we've seen the consequence in 1971?
Now, I would like to say a few words about the previous question, and that is that once you have a strategically unfavorable situation, no tactical brilliance can undo the problems of strategy. It was a strategic situation, which was, I would say, Pakistan Army, Pakistan Armed Forces, and Pakistan government machinery in East Pakistan was handicapped strategically. It is today that I was watching an interview of Field Marshal Manekshaw, where he had said that Pakistan Army had no chance there. They were outnumbered by 50-1. They were surrounded from all directions. And I was reading Mia Afrasiab Mehdi in his book. He has mentioned that as early as 1947, Nehru cabinet was discussing that how we can undo Pakistan or we can dismember Pakistan. So the effort had started immediately on creation of Pakistan. And there are many details, what kind of role Sheikh Mujibur Rahman played and all those people played, starting from as early as 1948. Now, having said that, we were facing a strategic, unfavorable situation, and no tactical brilliance could have recovered us from that situation. As regards the civil-military relationship is concerned, or coordination is concerned, I would agree that there have been blunders, there have been mistakes on the part of every segment of government which was there in East Pakistan. But having said that, no denying the fact, civil-military relations are highly important, and they are improving, and they are at a much better level as today's Pakistan is concerned.
Mr. Samrez, I'd also like to know what you think about the decision of military action before India's involvement, considering the civil situation in Bangladesh. Of course, there weren't many who opposed this action. Do you think this was the right choice?
I'm so sorry, I could not really pick your question.
So my question is that the choice of military action in Bangladesh before the Indian involvement in the 1971 war, do you think that was the right choice?
Military action. Now, the kind of environment that Indians had created over there, that is a division which has been mentioned earlier by one of the participants. The internal strife which has been created, the kind of force in the form of Mukti Bani that they had created. So application of military instrument created was counterproductive in that situation. And instead of achieving positive results, it started achieving negative results.
Okay. Farooq, do you think that there was enough public outcry on what was going on? Do you think that there were saner voices speaking up? Were there intellectual, influential people actually talking about what needs to happen? Did that sort of a maturity exist in the national character in Pakistan then?
Right, and that is a fascinating question. Exactly as fascinating as the previous question you asked General Samrez, because it is actually hitting the nub of the gist of the problem. When was that decision to act was taken, right? And that's why I keep on bringing you back to the question of books. When you have a government in the country that is not representative, when you don't have a constitution in the country that could have stood, there was one in 1956, the other one was in early 60s that a Yukon brought, and then it faded away, and then you had to have a third constitution in 73. At that time, you don't usually have the normal systemic checks and balances, and that's why the maturity in the system. When I read books on history, particularly 1971, I feel that all those checks and balances were giving out to pressures, and everyone was actually contributing to this fight that had to actually eventually come. And there are two aspects which are important. If you talk about saner voices, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman turns out to be, until the separation or briefly before the operation, turns out to be quite a saner voice, right? And amazingly, another person that actually created his party, the Awami League was earlier called Awami Muslim League, and Soharwardi actually founded it, right? And Soharwardi, I think, after Quaid-e-Azam, was the tallest leader in the country's history. Not Bhutto Sahab, he was greater than Bhutto Sahab, and his impact was immense. But did we pay the attention to such voices? He became a prime minister later on, but the kind of TORs he got, he was reduced to a pygmy. So in this country, I think we have a lot to learn. India has a lot to learn, because if you set fire to another country's house, the fire actually reaches back, and we are seeing what is happening in India. And in Bangladesh also, because they still have to reckon with history as well, while there is also, history is written by the victors, and Bangladesh got the freedom or the independence, and at that time, of course, their history has actually superseded other histories. But Biharis, other people, what they went through in Bangladesh and what Mukti Bani did to the civilians, that is also a story that needs to be explored. Yes. So everyone has to be blamed here.
I wanted to ask a question from AVM Malik, if he's still with us. We had 1971, where we know that the propaganda was run by India at that time, and obviously they engaged us in the two front, and one of the side, East Pakistan, became Bangladesh. Now, India constantly has been trying to engage us on the other front, the Western front, obviously through Afghanistan and through BLA and other factions as well in Balochistan. Miscreants are being funded, being actively supported by the Indians. We have proofs as well. We have time and again given the dossiers on them as well. But what do we as a nation need to do now, right now, and the younger generation of Pakistan need to know that what went wrong in 1971 and how we can save ourselves this time?
Thank you very much for asking me. Let's just go back and see. In 1971, the military presence and outnumbered Pakistan Army, Air Force, Navy fighting, two-pronged war. We, after the war, we have been, analyzing the war of 71 in our top colleges, National Defense University, and even till today, in the major courses, it is being very critically analyzed, and the lessons learned are applied in our tactical scenarios, in our strategy. But what have we learned on the political side? Because, as you're saying, as Mr. Farooq was saying, the history is written by the winners. You see, just to quote, Pakistan Air Force fought better in 1971 if we just see the Indian numbers, that the number of kills we had over Indians. But we could never glorify our performance because at that time the media was being managed in a manner, and Mr. Bhutto has taken over Pakistan, and there was a very willful, effort on the part of the government of Pakistan at that time that they failed to, give due credit to people who were fighting in 1971 war, even the people who, could have been glorified, people who escaped from POW camps. But somehow the narrative was built where there was a deliberate effort to demoralize armed forces. Even Mr. Bhutto did the restructuring, created, higher defense organization to harness and have, a tighter grip over a wounded army leadership. So,
Right. Yes, continue, Mr. Ijaz.
Political leadership haven't learned their lesson. This is what we see in our today's scenario. Situation is not different. India is same. India is same. India, there is a continuity of war against Pakistan from 1948 onwards. Only the shape and the theater or the application of kinetic or non-kinetic energy, forces, that changes. The leadership changes, but Indian agenda against Pakistan remains the same.
Absolutely. And you were talking about, of course, political leaders not learning their lesson. But since we understand that India back in 1971, what it was doing and what it is doing today is so similar, do you think that the world at large also does not understand as yet, or just still continues to keep a blind eye towards what's going on? Is this the kind of perspective that is shared or that is popular among the world today, or is the Indian version the one that is accepted?
Definitely the Indian version is accepted. You see, time and again, we have given in a post 9/11 scenario, we had given sacrifices of over 80,000 people, both civilian and military, over in tune of billions of over $100 billion of economy losses. But we have been, hiring, do more, and we were given hyphenated with the problem and not with the solution of the Afghan, because India somehow, they have been able to convince through their proper lobbying and their presence in the policymaker circles of Washington. Their staffers, their in the State Department, how they have and been, having the positions where they could make the policy for this region. And mind you, what has happened since 71, that was the era of, war, the spatial war, or the Cold War sponsored. Russia played its role, obviously, because of the Cold War. They also wanted to settle a score with then United Pakistan. But now, this is not, it is now war of economics. And India being a huge market, the entire world has their own vested interests attached with Indian diaspora, with Indian economy, with Indian market. So that is why nobody, even the Muslim Ummah that we keep on harping, who is standing behind us or who is standing beside us on Kashmir? Nobody.
Right. So if these are the rules of the game, and if this is what India is doing in terms of lobbying and putting forward its own propaganda campaign, Mr. Samres, do you think this means that perhaps our efforts in terms of advocating these issues, bringing forth these issues to light, is lacking? Do you think, are we doing enough to tell the world about what really happened, both back in the historical context in terms of Pakistan and India, or in Kashmir, or what's going on in India today? Do you think that our efforts are the one that are lacking at the moment?
Certainly, because unfortunately our political elite, they keep their own party interest, their own vested interest on priority and not the national interest of Pakistan. Why don't we join together, leaving aside the domestic, dynamics of domestic politics? Why can't we get together, get united on the issue of Kashmir, strengthen government's effort? We have not been able to build up on the Prime Minister's speech in the United Nations General Assembly. Why? Because we have not followed up. We have, the entire government is already, it's moving in, circles and trying to resolve, do firefighting of the domestic issues, non-issues actually. And we are not realizing that what's happening in the region, how are we being, sandwiched from various different regional players, and how India is trying to, demonize us in the entire world.
Thank you. Mr. Samres, I'd like to ask you a similar question. Considering the fact that we see that the entire world has found out about the India propaganda campaign, the kind of network and coordinated efforts that exist in terms of putting forward their Hindutva ideology. And of course, we understand that that's a different kind of flow that perhaps we don't want to go towards. And then there are, of course, economic interests and vested interests of different nations. But putting that aside, despite these concerns, do you think that whatever that Pakistan is doing at the moment will never be enough? I mean, does this sort of an action by India is what needs to be equated by the country for the world to listen?
Is that as far as propaganda is concerned, it played a major role as far as the 1971 war was concerned. Now we are into fifth generation warfare, hybrid warfare. We are hearing those kind of things. And now is the time once the battle of narratives is more important to be won than the physical battle.
Right.
But however, having said that, I think that Pakistan is now competing India in this kind of warfare in a fairly good condition. As far as the other issues are concerned, like Indian atrocities in Kashmir or other problems are concerned, I think Pakistan media, as well as Pakistan as a state, is contesting India in fifth generation warfare in a very, very potent and effective manner.
Right. Farooq, there are always some sort of divides that come into play when we, of course, look back in history, or we look at politics today in different parts or whatever is going on. There's this ethnic divide or religious divide or something that is preyed upon by different political parties or countries, and then that's the reason why so many cruelties and injustices took place. But when we look at the fact that this is something that contributed back in 1971, is currently contributing in Afghanistan also, in terms of different factions that exist, in terms of whatever's going on in India, are these issues which seem to be functioning at the grassroots level of all of these problems really being addressed by anyone at the moment, even Pakistan for that matter? Are we doing something with regards to increasing awareness, increasing tolerance, decreasing the divides that exist within our societies, within countries at large?
Right, and that's again a very profound question. And the problem at this moment is the kind of age that we are living in is the age of acceleration. Remember, no country is, with the exception perhaps of China, Japan, and a couple of others, where because of an accident of history, there's a lot of similarity among people. Usually countries are made of very different people, right? They come together, ethnicities, languages, religion, and everything. So there always are fault lines that can be exploited. Even in the US, you have seen recently, once again, white supremacists have started exploiting those divides. But, with this age of acceleration, because of internet, propaganda, communication, there's going to be more problem. But regarding, we have to actually examine India's efforts to use propaganda. Because, and then I'm going to ask Faisal a question, because he brought up the question of propaganda.
Sure.
Remember, for India has an advantage over you, and that is a history or image or soft power of over 1,000 years, right? India has, as a name, existed for quite some time with its glamours and so-called charms. And then when 1971 was taking place, at that time also, remember that that was the age of popular movements, right? Everywhere, from Che Guevara to elsewhere, people, because of this Cold War and everything, actually aligned with the leftist, fight for their rights and everything. At that time, India kind of used all the levers to exploit it. But my question to Faisal, because he studies history as closely as I do, I was reading about Akashvani and Indian channels being actually going native, that they were so native that they could communicate with Mukti Bahani and actually propagate and feed their strategy to them. My question is, PBC was also there, Faisal. But do you think that there was something lacking in our media strategy, that our radio could not actually function properly or connect with the people of Pakistan?
Certainly, obviously they did not do their work properly, but one reason what I could grab out of it was that Pakistan at that time did not even want to talk about it. Pakistan wanted to just wanted to keep it under the curtains, and Pakistan just wanted to portray as nothing is going wrong. Nothing is going wrong at that, in there. But as you've asked me a question, now I'll go towards General Samrez and I'll ask him a question. Looking at the facts that India has been exploiting our fault lines in the past, now we know that India has its own fault lines. Seven Sisters are there, Khalistan is there, then several other fault lines. 22. Yeah, Modi is there. 22 fault lines are there. Are we ready to exploit them, and should we exploit them as India has been doing, and India boasts about it as well? Once again, I would mention the addresser of Ajit Doval in Shastra University, where he claimed that they are running a defensive offense doctrine against Pakistan. If they can run it, why can't we run it, sir?
Okay, good question, Faisal. Let me say that India has been a troublemaker throughout in our history, and they have left no stone unturned to damage Pakistan in whatever way they could do. Particularly if I talk of war on terror, in the last 15-20 years, they created a two-front scenario for us. We were facing a challenge, a living enemy on the east, and we were also facing a colluded enemy on the west. Now, in that kind of environment, we face the unprecedented threat environment in the world. Let me take you to the grand strategy level. I would say that whatever geopolitical games have been played in our region in the past, and I would count them as three. One was before creation of Pakistan, once British fought the Soviet Empire, or they fought Anglo-Afghan wars to create a buffer zone. Second was in the 20th century, which was between US and the Soviet Union, and third was in 21st century, which was between the forces of terror and the US. Now, if I talk of the future geopolitical game, I would say that now India appears to be on the wrong side of the room, and Pakistan appears to be on the right side of the room. In earlier geopolitics games, there were two antagonists, and Pakistan was the conduit. But as far as the future is concerned, in my view, still there are two antagonists, that is one, US and China, and India is going to be the conduit, because India is now becoming the policeman on the behest of the US. Now, having said that, Pakistan is in a situation where we can repay to India in the best possible manner. And particularly if we take the case of situation in Ladakh, I think it was a good opportunity for Pakistan to turn the tables and impose on India the similar kind of two-front scenario that we have been facing in the last 20 years.
Right, Mr.
Having said
We're
that,
almost out of time. I'd just like to take a quick comment from Mr. Ijaz. Sir, if there's one thing we can take home from the war in 1971, what would that be? Quick comment, sir.
We should, teach and read history in totality, and we should not be selective, to draw our own lesson from history. We should read history in totality right from 1947 and, learn lessons and apply those lessons. Only then we can progress.
Absolutely.
Very quickly,
Thank
can
you
I-
very much for
can I
joining us,
say-
Mr. Ijaz and Mr. Samrez. Yes, Farooq, why
Yeah,
don't you
very
put your
quickly,
twist at the end?
I just wanted to actually say one thing. While
Yes.
Faisal was talking about defensive offense, I think that merits an entire program, and we should be doing it because it is more complicated than what we talk about. But regarding the lesson, I have only one lesson that I've learned. You will always have enemies, and enemy thinks that it is their right to exploit your weaknesses. It is your responsibility never to grow weak. If you're not weak, rest assured, no enemy can exploit
Right,
it.
that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us on the debate. Of course, the 1971 war has many, many lessons for us to learn, but it's important to be able to look at all the angles, which is what this show is all about as well. But it is important for you to be able to read and, of course, inform yourself as well, and then apply on the lessons and not let history repeat itself. Thank you very much for watching.